State. So I started my college career at Tarleton State. I am the first college graduate in my family. Finished up at UT Dallas and then went to Austin for law school. And so I was just this little country girl, went off into the big city, and then as soon as law school was over, came back and worked at a firm downtown Stephenville. So other than a few years in college, you know, I've been Stephenville, this part of Texas, born and raised. But a few years ago when I started running for this office, and I would be out knocking on doors, and people would sometimes ask, well, where'd you go to school? I have to own the full part of it, right? And we have a lot of Tarleton Texans out across Central Texas. It's amazing. We also have a lot of Aggies. I was waiting for it. A lot of Baylor Bears and some Red Raiders. Every now and then I find a Sooner. We're very accommodating. Jesus loves everyone. So when I would say, well, you know, I went to Austin for law school and then got back to Stephenville as quick as I could, sometimes I'd get that look, that little side eye, like, oh no, you know. But I would tell them, look, who better to serve you than a conservative, Jesus-loving girl from Central Texas who went into the belly of the beast for 3 years and came back home a conservative, Jesus-loving country girl. So I think that built a few bridges back with some people there. I am so fortunate to get to work for you in this room. You're my bosses. So we're coming tonight. We're going to talk about some of the things that we've worked on for you. I'm going to leave some time for any questions that you may have. I love to hear what's on your mind too. And if we don't get to something that you want to visit about, I'll be here for a little while afterward. And if we still don't get to it, we have an amazing team that helps serve you too. Meredith Frazier in the back of the room in the lovely yellow jacket is our district staff. She lives right here in Hood County with you, and we are so glad to have her on board to help us work through constituent issues that we have and make sure that anything that comes up, you have a robust team ready to help you out. We have another district member down in Coryell County, Celia. You may see her sometimes. She's been up here before. And then in your Austin office, we have Teresa, who's the chief of staff down there, who's running that part of the operation for us on a day-to-day. And then I get to see them all as we bebop around to all the many communities in our district. So as of redistricting a few years ago, House District 59 is 4 counties. It's Hood, Erath, Hamilton, and Coryell. So in that mix, we have 4 county judges. We've got 16 commissioners. We have 17 ISDs with at least 75% of the students live within 59. Some ISDs overlap with a couple of districts. And we've got in there 23 cities and census designated places for a grand total of 195,458 Texans. That's a lot of bosses. But it's a privilege to get to work and to serve. Every other year, in odd numbered years, your legislature meets in Austin for 140 days, starting in January, finishing up in May. And I say finishing up very loosely because we also come back anytime the governor calls us for special session. And in my 2 terms of serving you, I've had now 5 special sessions with another one on the horizon sometime probably next month. The governor hasn't told us yet when that may definitively be, but we do expect that it's coming. So get to serve on some committees for you that provide you with a meaningful voice. We work hard when we're there. We're up early in the morning. We are there late many times. We had Dr. Glenn and Wade Clark, and I think Billy was there at that same trip, come down on a bill for Granbury ISD, and I think it was like 10 o'clock at night before y'all even got a chance to be heard in that committee, because that's just sometimes how it goes. So it's a big deal when citizens come down to participate in your government. And I know for our district, it's a long hike too. For me, door to door, it's about 2.5 hours to get in the car and get down there. And then you gotta find a place to park, and then you gotta find your way into the building. So we welcome you though. Your input is invaluable because the kind of Texas that we get to live in, it's not like that in the rest of Texas. And if we don't participate and we don't engage, the rest of Texas will overrun our kind of Texas. So anytime there's a bill or a topic of interest to you and you want to come down and be involved, let us know. We would be happy to help you find the parking, get you in the building, give you snacks during the day. I think we fed you guys when you were there to keep your energy up and also so you wouldn't leave. But we're here to serve you, and we like working with you. Bring your kids. Please, please bring your kids. Let your kids see what their government looks like. They start to understand it belongs to them. Then they start to envision themselves as working within it. And that's so important. We have FFA groups that come down. We have a variety of different academic groups that come and visit the Capitol. And we would love to see more students come down and participate. When we can, we'll get them out on the floor so they can actually sit in their chair on the people's floor. I can't always do it, but it's a fun experience for them too. A lot of the bills that we worked on this last session, in fact, dealt with protecting our kids. There's a lot of ideologies that are taking hold, a lot of cultural wars that we're having, things that I wouldn't have necessarily thought would be the battles that we would have as we go into a legislative session, and yet here we are. Things like boys participating in sports with boys, and girls participating in sports with other biological girls. We've had to address that issue twice, passing bills to deal with NCAA sports this last session, and with UIL events the previous session, just to provide that my daughters, who are 15 and 10, they attend Stephenville ISD over there, not particularly an issue in our ISD, but in others it has been, to provide that young women are competing against other young women and not losing competitive slots to biological males who identify as another gender. I have grave concerns about how our kids are growing up, what they see. When people ask me sometimes, why did you want to run for this office? You know, because it's kind of a lunatic's errand, I guess. It's very easy and simple in that I have two daughters. Right now they're 15 and 10. And in a blink, they're gonna be 25 and 20, 35 and 30. Lord willing, I get some grandbabies. What kind of Texas are they all gonna have? Well, the kind of Texas that they inherit from us depends on the work that we do today. So I know I'm not speaking into a vacuum there. This is a very involved community. Show of hands if you volunteer for any organization in any capacity in this community. Yeah, it's like that pretty well throughout our entire region. And that's what makes us different too. When you are elbow to elbow with someone filling bags at the Chamber of Commerce for a back to school event, or you're delivering Meals on Wheels, or you are at a football game cheering for your Pirates on a Friday night, or you are in the pew next to each other on a Sunday morning, figuring out how you're gonna serve and minister to the needy and the hurt and the orphans and the elderly in our communities. It's different. You're voting at that point in time for the kind of community that you wanna live in, and it's meaningful. So when I picked my 10-year-old up from school today, I told her, I'm gonna go over to Granbury tonight, I'm gonna talk to a group over there, and she says, what kind of group? and I said, oh, it's a group of Republicans. She's like, well, that's good. Because sometimes you gotta go into harder conversations. Well, sometimes the conversations we have within our Republican groups are hard conversations too. And then she said, well, what are you gonna talk to him about? I said, because I don't know, what do y'all want to talk about? That's what we're going to talk about ultimately, right? Well, I told her, well, we've got these push cards, and there's a bunch of things on here, so we'll probably talk about some of these. We've got them at the back of the room too. And she kind of looked at it, and she was like, yeah, that's good. Or you could just talk from your heart. Yeah, we need more of that, more authenticity, more just conversation. You know, we have a majority in the Texas House. I think when we started the session, it was like 85, 65 Republican Democrats. But the majority of the bills that we pass in the legislature have bipartisan support, overwhelming majority of them. A little bit of context there. This last session, 8,046 bills were filed between the Senate and the House. That's a lot of ideas about how to make Texas better. Everybody that's following them, I think for the most part, I think most people think they're making Texas better. Some of the bills, I wonder what they actually are thinking. At the end of the session, and after the governor had gone through, and he did veto some bills along the way, 1,170 of those became effective in our state. That's about 14.5% of what was filed actually passed into law at the end of the day. Now, I'll be very honest with you, I vote no a lot. We have a lot of things to vote on, and as a conservative, I firmly believe more government is not better government. There's a lot of things that, is it nice? Would it be good? Sure, but is it a proper role of government? I don't think so. Many of those things pass into law anyway. At the end of that session, there's a ranking that comes out of all 150 House members that takes a look at every single vote that we cast, and there was over 2,900 different votes that we are judged on there. And this professor at Rice University does a statistical analysis of all those votes. And he ranks members from the most conservative to the most liberal in the House. And at the end of that, after they did their analysis, your state rep was ranked the 5th most conservative member in the Texas House of Representatives. Why I think that's important is I think that's reflective of the values and the principles of this district. We believe in limited government and low taxes. We believe strongly in personal responsibility. We believe in the right to keep and bear arms, that there is a sanctity of life from conception to the grave. Those values aren't shared everywhere else. Some districts, other Republicans, we can't all be number 5 on the list, right? Some are further down the list. Their districts are often much more purple than where we're at. We have an 80-20 Trump district. We came out strong for President Trump. I'm confident whoever our Republican nominee is next year, if it's President Trump, we're gonna come out strong again. Or whoever it is, we're coming out strong because we believe firmly in those principles, and we know that the Republican Party embodies the principles that we most believe in. We're also a God-fearing part of the state. We start our meetings with prayers. I love that y'all say the pledges too. It makes me a little sad when I go somewhere and they don't say the pledges. But we start with prayer. Start the day with prayer, end the day with prayer, pray often in between. So there's a whole list of various bills that were filed, things that we passed this last session. I'm gonna talk just on one category of them, and then I'm gonna let you ask questions about anything else out there that you may have questions on. Because this one is particularly of concern consistently, and it's our border. Border security is probably the #1 issue facing Texans. It's not a new issue by any stretch. Imagine my entire lifetime it's been an issue, but the issue has changed in the last even 3 years. The last 10 years it was already changing, but the last 3, when we had a change at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, things took a sharp turn at our border too. This last session, we invested $5.1 billion of Texans' money into border security, for everything from personnel down there to barriers. You may have seen in the news that Governor Abbott has deployed buoys into the river. Sometimes I see news articles talking about how mean these are, how horrible they are, because people are getting hurt by them. Well, if you haven't seen them, they're big orange buoys in the river. They don't sneak up on you. They're not mean, they're a barrier. Nations have a responsibility to protect their borders and protect their citizens, and our nation isn't doing that. So while I very eagerly and readily voted for an appropriation of $5.1 billion for border security, it's not Texans' responsibility to fund that. I have followed a little bit loosely some of the things going on in Washington, D.C. We have a couple of different Texas representatives who in recent years have filed bills to try and recover some of the money that Texas spends on border security from the federal government. I say followed it loosely because my expectations that the Biden administration will reimburse us are very low, but my appreciation for those men and women who are trying is very high. I believe that August Pfluger, who previously represented Hood County and Erath County, I believe he's one of those that had authored that. So what we have seen numbers-wise in the last few years is a significant escalation in the number of illegal border crossings. Under the last year of the Trump administration, it was somewhere around 450,000 people coming across the border. In 2021, it was over 1.7 million people. In 2022, it was over 2.4 million people that we know of. And this year, as of the end of July, we were somewhere around 1.97, 1.98 million, so we're on track through the end of October to exceed last year's numbers too. It's purposeful. So I appreciate several actions that our governor has taken in response to this. One of them is those buoys. But before the buoys went into the water, Governor Abbott started loading people into buses and busing them to sanctuary cities. Some of those liberal counterparts in other states who had chastised us for being unsympathetic and uncompassionate people, that we ought to just open the door to anyone that wants to come across the southern border. Well, it's interesting how quickly they change their tune when the door that's needing to be open is theirs and not ours. This last week, did anybody see what Mayor Adams out of New York City had to say? If you didn't get the benefit of this, I jotted down a little quote from him. So what has happened is that in the last, I think, 12-month period, New York City has received 110,000, give or take. They would like to call them asylum seekers, whatever you want to call them, illegal border crossers. They've received 110,000. And it's a burgeoning crisis for them, as you may imagine, because they don't have the ability to house them, to feed them, to take care of this influx of people. And so Mayor Adams is at an event this last week, and he says that, I don't see an end to this. This issue will destroy New York City. In a 12-month period, New York City has received 110,000 people. That's less than what has come across the Texas border any 1 month of the last 12. I remember studying in law school many, many years ago a real estate course that was talking about the principle of NIMBY, not in my backyard. You know, it's fine, but not in my backyard. That's basically the New York position on this. And so then I caught a clip of the ladies on The View, and I do not go watching The View on purpose, just so we're clear. But I was in a different cesspool called Twitter, and that video popped up on there, and it had some headline about what the View ladies had to say about this. And it's shocking. You know, they can't believe that these people would be sent to New York City when there's wide open spaces like Texas that are so much better equipped to deal with this. I have also seen press conferences, I can't remember if it was New York or it was Delaware, it's somewhere, one of the northeastern states, that they were asking residents to open up their homes, to take migrants into their homes as a compassionate way of dealing with the issue. What I have not seen yet is these blue states talking about, well, how about we close the border? How about we do that? How about we reinstitute a policy to remain in Mexico while we evaluate your asylum claim and we determine whether you are an economic migrant or you're truly a political asylum seeker, because these are two very different things. How about we just make sure that you're not an evildoer from a country on a watch list coming across our border, and then we don't know where you are. I don't know. It's It's a very radical position if you're a little old country girl Shelby Slawson versus the ladies of the View. But even more concerning is just in the last couple of days what has developed with some talk coming out of the White House administration about a remain in Texas policy. Not remain in Mexico, but remain in Texas. The LA Times had a story out talking something about DHHS or Homeland had this idea for GPS tracking on people that come across the border so they can make sure they stay in Texas and don't go somewhere else. So it would seem that maybe the Biden administration isn't favorable, but they want to put it up on the Red River instead of by the southern border. And that's what we're up against. So when we deal with the state budget, the ways that this crisis impacts our budget is partly in what we appropriate for border security, but it's also in the costs associated with our schools, with our healthcare, with our law enforcement, with our jails. It affects us all throughout the state. It's not just the counties down on the border anymore that are border communities. It's the entirety of our state. Ultimately, what's the answer? It's a federal answer. It's ultimately a federal answer. We can't appropriate enough money to fully secure the border by ourselves. We're gonna keep doing every single thing that we can, and we're open to creative ideas, like busing people to other communities to really put the spotlight on the issue in a way that hopefully will drive some other action. We need a few more seats in the US Senate, and we need a different occupant come 2024 in the White House.
Amen.
So I love that y'all are as involved as you are, because it's gonna take all of us. And there's a tendency, I guess, where we might feel like taken for granted that, we're a red part of the state, we're gonna stay a red part of the state. And we are, for a long time. But your vote is powerful beyond just what happens in your communities here. Because 5 years ago, 2018, we had an election with a Senate seat up that involved perennial candidate, perennial loser, knock on wood, Beto O'Rourke, and Ted Cruz. And at the beginning of the night, who in here likes to watch returns at night on election night? It's like my Super Bowl, right? So at the beginning of the night, as you're watching those come in, it's a little bit of a gut check, right? Because who reports first? The big counties, the big blue counties. And so it was looking moderately favorable for that guy from El Paso until rural Texas started turning in our numbers. We're just slower, but we pack a punch. And by the end of the night, it was red rural Texas that held a Senate seat for Ted Cruz. So he ran in 2018. I ran for this office for the first time for the 2020 cycle. And I would go out into all over the place, knocking on doors, talking to people. And I knew when I got to a house that still had a Ted Cruz sign in their flower bed or tucked up under the shrubs, I knew we're gonna get along great. There's another way you can tell Republicans in general, conservatives specifically, when you get to a house, there's often a flag flying. Often a flag flying. Because it means something to us. Our country means something to us. That's why we show up. That's why on a random Tuesday night in September, 50-something people are in a room in Granbury, giving little country girl a chance to visit with you for a little bit. It's going to be a big election cycle. I know y'all are already in one election cycle right now. When you go vote in a few weeks on your municipal and your school board, you have school board right now too, right? Yes. You'll also have some constitutional amendments on the ballot, things that you can approve or not. I mean, I'm a fan of the no vote, righteous no here and there, right? there are numerous propositions. I'm going to tell you about just 2 of those. And then if you have any questions about the others, we're sending out a mailer in the coming weeks. We'd be happy to give you more background info on it. Do we have any retired educators in the room? Yes, thank you. So the 2 sessions I've been there, we were working on a COLA for retired educators. Last session, we didn't get the COLA passed, we got a 13th check passed. This time we got the COLA passed. It requires a constitutional amendment election, so when we all go to the ballot box, I'm not going to tell you how to vote, but I just might ask you, think of your favorite teacher. Usually people can pretty quickly call to mind a favorite. It's a meaningful help for them. It's funded by their teacher retirement system. And the reason for the delay in getting it onto a ballot was to ensure that when that COLA is passed, that it doesn't upend their retirement fund and push it out of actuarial soundness. So all of the much smarter people than me on such issues that do the evaluations on the fund assured that it's healthy enough and robust enough that they do not think that it will cause any risk to the retirement system. So that one will be on the ballot. Side note, no group shows up in force at the Capitol like retired teachers. None. It's pretty cool, but it's also a little intimidating. They're usually in their red shirts, and they come in and they fill the gallery. It's a really neat day, and it's fun to get to work for some of the same men and women who spent a lot of time pouring into and over me over in Stephenville ISD. So that's one of the things. The other thing that's on the ballot is the second most important issue to voters, or at least the number 2 thing I hear about the most after the board, property tax relief. So you might have heard that we were really super efficient about passing property tax relief. Said no one. No, it was not. It was not efficient. In fact, there were a lot of competing ideas about how best to deliver some property tax relief to Texans. It was a priority of the governor, the speaker, and the lieutenant governor all across the board. The question was never whether to, but how best to. And so at the end of the work on those bills, the relief package that was passed is dedicating about $17 billion to help buy down school taxes, which is the biggest portion of any of our tax bills, is the M&O portion. It doesn't affect INS in any way that I recall, INS being the bonding, because you don't want to be on the hook for paying bonds in some other jurisdiction. Everybody's on their own for bonds. But it does kick in more state money to buy down the M&O portion of your school tax bill. Then the constitutional amendment part is an increase in your homestead exemption. You have the opportunity to increase that homestead exemption to $100,000. That's very meaningful, especially in our part of the state. There are communities in those 23 cities and census designated places where many homesteads are at or near that $100,000 mark, which is significant help to those families and often retirees. There's a lot of, probably sometimes our retired educators, so double help potentially for them on the ballot. But it's a big deal. It's a big vote. I don't know that there has ever been a time where Texans voted themselves out of an additional exemption on the property taxes. It'll almost certainly pass. But again, take nothing for granted. And if you don't like it, go vote no on it, because that's our right? One of my biggest concerns, other than policy issues, is having difficult conversations about a wide range of issues with civility, civil discourse, right? And in particular, for our kids, the Bible talks to us about train up your child in the way that they should go, and when they're old, they will not turn from it. What are we training them up in? I look at a generation sometimes right now, a little bit below me, and wonder, how are they trained up, and what are we going to do when you can't hear an opposing viewpoint without needing to cancel them entirely for having the audacity to think in a different way. I don't know what the answer is, except that for kids, they need more face time, less this time, and you figure things out differently when you're talking one-on-one. I don't know. I mentioned that the overwhelming majority of the bills that we pass in the House have bipartisan support, but we still have some stark divides down there. And there's one member, she's a Democrat. I don't think we have a lick of nothing in common. And my mama raised me that you keep looking for things. You look for the good in someone else. You keep looking for something about that person. And if nothing else, Jesus loves him too. Right? Well, I've been looking. And I'm here to tell you Jesus loves her too. And she might say the same thing about me, I don't know. But we had this really super strange experience. We don't talk a whole lot even, because we just know. We just know the other one is on the other side. If she's a yes, I'm a no. If she's a no, I might still be a no. But we had this bill that we were working on, and it was to reform some provisions dealing with utility companies, and particularly electric generators, to address market manipulation so that they can't take advantage of the market in a way that increases all of our utility bills. Well, this wasn't a Republican or a Democrat issue. It wasn't really a rural or an urban issue, but it was a really confusing issue because there are 3 big generators in Texas and they were fighting back against it. They didn't like the bill. And then all of a sudden, here comes my colleague to tell me she supports this bill and she wants to help it get passed. And I thought, well, I don't know, do I still support it? What's in it? What's the catch? What's the trick? I don't know. But at the end of the day, it had big support, both parties in the chamber, but it was a tough fight. We won it on a squeaker, but we got it passed. Governor signed it into law. But as soon as that work on that bill was over, and she came by my desk to say, well, congratulations, and I was like, oh, that was weird, wasn't it? She said, yeah, well, I was like, okay, let's go back. And she went, and so, but it's important to be able to figure out how to have those conversations, right, with somebody that we're maybe diametrically opposed to most of the time. But Jesus loves them too. So that's just kind of all over the place, right? I want to open it up and give y'all a chance if anybody's got any questions or anything that you want to talk about. Yes, ma'am.
I'm not a teacher, or was not a teacher, but I'm on teacher's retirement because I worked at the university as an employee. And so I appreciate the effort that you're making to get us a raise. But my question is, the people that work for you, the aides that you have, I've always wondered, how are they paid? Do you pay them out of your salary? I hope not. Or
So, because I get paid $600 a month, it wouldn't go far. I could not afford the quality of people that I have working for our office. So each legislative office has a budget to pay for staff, to pay for supplies in the office. It doesn't pay me anything else, but it does cover staff. It will also provide a stipend for an office. So side note, we are looking to set up an office physical location here in Granbury too. We haven't done that yet. But once we do, we'll put out the note. We'd love to have you come to an opening. But ultimately, an office is like brick and mortar, right? We're available to you all the time. You do not have to come to an office. You can email, you can call, we can meet you for coffee, anything like that. We're here for you. So, but no, ma'am, I could not, I could not hire them out of.
well, does everybody get the same stipend, or do they?
Well, everyone
will have population in your area, or how is that divided?
I wish they factored in, 4-county geographic area, because it's a whole lot different for us. One of the urban reps said to me one time, I can be at the far end of my district and call home and tell my family, hey, put a pizza in the oven, and I can be there as it's coming out. I'm like, it'd be a burn mess if you try that at 59. Like the VFD would beat you there. So in the House, it's just allocated the exact same amount to all 150 offices. In the Senate, they have a whole different system. So the Senate has much larger districts than us. They have, I don't know, mysterious buckets of money where they do different things over there.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you for coming and speaking with us tonight in our growing group here. One thing I'd like to say, thank you for supporting the gender in sports. I'm a firm believer men should be with men and women should be with women, and it shouldn't be mixed. So thank you for supporting that. But a question I do have, is there one or two bills you can describe that you are pushing for, and tell us maybe why you push for it so hard?
Absolutely. So one of them, and we worked on it across two sessions, was the Todd Hoagland Act. We got that passed this session, and what it is, it's an enhancement for an assault with a deadly weapon that leads to either irreversible paralysis or a persistent coma of the victim. It was generated by a couple of acts of violence over in URoHC County in the last decade. One, a mom was sitting on the park bench watching her little kids play when a stranger came up and stabbed her in the back. Her name is Brandy Todd, and that act of just random violence left her paraplegic for life. Another was a Tarleton student was at home studying one night, knock at her door, she answered the door, and there was a fella there who shot her in the face, thinking he'd come to the apartment of somebody he was in some sort of drug deal with. No, it wasn't her, and she was left a quadriplegic. Her name was Jamie Hoagland. Jamie has since passed away, but her family was very involved in this bill. They came down multiple times in 2 different sessions to provide personal testimony. The DA in URoHC County came down to testify about how these women were committed to wheelchairs for life, whereas because of the felony level, I believe at the time it was a C, their perpetrators could be sentenced to a maximum of 20 years and then get good time off and be out much sooner. They can now be sentenced up to life in prison. And what really blows me away is that there's not a thing in the world that I can do to fix that for Jessica Hoagland, Jamie's mom, or for Brandy Todd. Can't fix it. Doesn't fix it for them either, passing that bill. But they are committed to doing what they can do so that other Texas families maybe don't suffer in the same way that they did, or at least those people stay behind bars. So that was one. We actually have a whole list of them, and I'd be happy to get you the whole list. Sure. Sure. Is there anything else?
You mentioned
Yeah.
you mentioned border and maybe Texas trying to recover costs, but there's been a lot of property damage to landowners, homeowners, whether it's theft, through fences. I know personal friends have had property damage on their ranches. And so is there any estimate on the amount of property damage on a yearly basis that you've heard?
Oh, I have not heard an estimate. That would be a very interesting
We can hear this question back here.
Okay, what he's asking is, on the border, they've seen, landowners down there have seen a lot of property damage as people are coming through. And is there any quantification of what kind of numbers are involved in the amount of damage that those landowners have seen? There may have been a little bit of testimony on that this last session because there were some bills in other committees about providing a fund to help reimburse some of those owners, even for fencing. I am generally not a fan of those bills, right? Because I don't want to see the government stepping in and fixing an issue temporarily by building that fence again. I want to see the government come in and build a barrier that keeps it out in the first place. But it's absolutely a mess, and it is hurting livelihoods. It's dangerous for families down there. So even a cost beyond property damage is a whole other issue. Another cost, or I don't want to say benefit to it, but there's something there, is what it's doing politically in the valley, in changing some people who believed themselves for a very long time to be Democrats have come to realize that the Democrat Party is abandoning them on border issues that are directly affecting their homes and their families, and they've been voting more and more Republican. We've picked up a couple seats down there in the last couple cycles. I'd love to see that happen again too, but we'll see. Yes, ma'am.
So, I live in the northwestern part of the county, and we have real issues with water there.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, Lake Palapino is 40%, or maybe 45, I'm sorry. So I know that the folks in Sandtown have been on level 2 water restrictions for some time. There are people who are trying to water their livestock, who are, because they're on a water co-op, are paying excessive fines just to water their animals.
Hmm.
We have got just an excessive amount of buildings, and there's really nothing that anyone can do about it. And the reason no one can do anything about it is because the Upper Trinity Groundwater Board has got a floor of 2 acres for rural development instead of, well, like where I live, when they developed the LWD ranch, the floor was 10 acres.
Mm-hmm.
You could not buy anything smaller than that. So I know it's tricky. I understand property rights. I even know that water property rights are different from surface property rights. And I also, because I'm on the well, I'm not really all that interested in the government telling me what to do with my water. So I get that it's a real issue. But I'm wondering what Austin is how Austin's looking at it, what they're thinking about it. I know that Dr. Rogers was working on a solution, and I know that did not get traction because I was at the meeting at the Upper Trinity Groundwater Board where somebody said something about eminent domain, and everybody in the room just, yeah.
Hands up,
No,
not it.
no,
Yeah, or no,
so-
no, not it.
Yeah, so what do you think is going on, or what maybe is the solution?
Yeah, I remember that Glenn was working on a bill to create a district up in this area that was gonna include several counties. I can't remember which counties. There's a whole new water caucus that was formed down there that's gonna specifically try to tackle some of those issues, and many of the members of it are, have ag backgrounds because of some of the same reasons you're talking about. No doubt about it, water is gonna be one of the biggest fights in Texas for now and forever. Partly because of a growing population out there and a scarcity of a resource, but some of it could also be about how do we develop some of the desalination opportunities that some communities are looking at. And I don't have a hard and fast answer on that. When you are dealing with particular issues with any of those agencies, if there's something that our office can do to help you in that regard, please call and let us talk a little more in depth with you and get a little more granular on.
Actually, Teresa in your office,
Uh-huh.
has been really sweet, really nice. Listen to me complain a lot because they're putting in a wet pit right outside the city limits. And because it's in the unincorporated part of the county, there's nothing the county can do. I mean, nothing. This is on a ranch, and because my husband worked in that industry for a long time before he changed jobs, I happen to know that's gonna be a mess.
Mm-hmm.
They're gonna have to take massive amounts of water, I mean hundreds of acres, to wash that material to get it into, to make the material ready for building. And when Philip was doing it, they had to get water out of the Brazos River, and it was permitted even out of the Brazos. So I don't know what is gonna happen out there. I just know that my county folks really can't do anything because legally they don't have a way to do anything. This is all TCEQ, and
Mhm.
TCEQ is not always, you know, they have a different view.
Yes.
So I just wonder if you guys, I know you're building your pockets, but what do we do in the meantime?
Let's talk a little bit more after this and
Yes, ma'am.
fill me in a little bit on the pit that you're talking about out there. It's hard to, exactly for a reason that you mentioned about landowner rights, right? You don't want the government coming and telling you.
Nope.
I'm sure the neighbor feels the same way, but there has to be a balance somewhere. An example of that, a bill that I filed this last session was to protect the airspace around Fort Hood a little better from further encroachment of windmills. Now, I don't love wind energy, I don't love solar energy, I think they're okay, but they don't show up for us the way that natural gas and nuclear do. That's what we need more of. Well, we're not gonna be able to easily get more nuclear because of federal regulations on it, but we got an abundant amount of gas under our feet in Texas. I serve on state affairs. We did a lot of grid reforms this last session. I keep the URCOT app on my phone that shows me throughout the day, you know, how the grid conditions are and what portion of it is made up out of, you know, which of those resources. All of that to say, I get that a landowner has rights and they may want to contract with an entity to put really big turbines up there. They may want to use acres and acres and hundreds of acres for solar, but there's a point where overriding interests mean that the government has to come in and do something. And so I tried to get a further protection of that airspace around Fort Hood from additional windmills out there. You know, talk about people that fight? The wind energy buddiets. Yeah, they do. So we didn't get it this time, but I know now how they were coming to kill it, and we'll try again. We'll try again next time. I know there was, yes, sir, Mr. Luton.
Sounds like we've got a school voucher special session. School funding was totally ignored by our governor, lieutenant governor. What do you see coming out of this special session as far as vouchers, school funding, and what do you feel about both of those subjects?
I'm happy to talk about that. So I wouldn't say that it was totally ignored, because your House came in and passed a bill for teacher pay raises, sent it over to the Senate, and the Senate said, okay, sure, but also vouchers, and sent it back to us repackaged with vouchers in there, at which point the bill author said, no dice. We'll just talk about this at a later date because the governor's gonna make us come back anyway. So meanwhile, there was an appropriation made of about $4.5 billion that's just sitting there, already appropriated for school funding. Roughly 3.9 of that was intended for teacher pay raise and formula funding for our schools. So that's still to be dealt with. And then in that, I think there was about 500 million or so that had been flagged as potential for school choice. Now, what does that mean? We don't know, because we haven't seen a bill come through. There have been a lot of different ideas, and some of those were heard in the House. They passed out of the Senate. But the House didn't have an appetite for it at the time. I don't know when we're gonna be called back, and I don't know what it's gonna look like. So it's really hard for me to tell you definitively what it is when it hasn't even been filed yet. No one has called to tell me what they're putting in it. I wouldn't be a first call anyway, because historically, I have not been a supporter of vouchers or school choice, because I grew up in the public schools right over there, and I know those. I'll take you through it though, because the story doesn't end entirely there. So that's where my kids go to school, that's where my kids will go to school. Our schools are different. Our schools have a different sense of identity to our communities. We're Stephenville Honeybees, Stephenville Yellow Jackets, and we'll go proclaim that all over the state. Not every school district is that way. And it really gets me pretty riled up when I see Austin ISD using their school buses to transport people to gay parades. I'm a taxpayer, you're a taxpayer. Do you want that resource being used for that? And then come around and tell me that your school is underfunded, but you're using your buses for those purposes. When you're using the halls of your school for parades, for pride. I'm not okay with that. When you are housing books in your library that have sexually explicit materials in them, and then coming and defending that in Austin when we have a bill to get those out of the libraries. I'm not a fan of that. I don't know what we do about a generation of kids and students in Harris County, and in Travis County, and in Bexar County, and in Dallas County, and increasingly in Tarrant County. How are we training up those children? Harris County, was it Houston ISD that was taken over, Dr. Glenn?
Yeah.
Was taken over by the state. Now, maybe it was part political, I don't know, I hear both sides of that issue. But there's a problem there. So do we stand on a principle and keep those kids in those schools? What do we do? What do we do for those kids in those schools? Honestly, I'm not worried about our kids in our schools. because we hold firm. I know there was a reference made earlier that sometimes your school board meetings get spicy. Because you care. There's becoming some spicy meetings in some other communities around this state because they care. But it's not spicy everywhere. Sometimes it's spicy in the other direction. So I don't know what the ultimate answer is. I don't know what the plan is that comes through. I can tell you that I will critically evaluate it. I'd be happy to talk to you when it comes out. I know I'll have a Zoom, if not an in-person, with all of our superintendents to hash through that. Board members too. I hear from y'all. We'll see what it is when it gets there, and that's my honest answer to it. I will not do anything. I will not vote for anything that I think hurts our schools here. But I don't know what that's going to look like. Yes, ma'am.
So, I know that you don't really have an answer, forgive me for asking this, but Robin Hood, I'm old, so I remember when Robin Hood actually came out. And my issue now is, you're taking millions and millions out of our school district, and the truth is, the really poor districts, you're not helping them. I mean, I just read an article about a school district out in way west Texas where they're having to hold doors on the Baylor, but you're taking $11 million out of Greenberry ISD. So that's not working. It's not viable. Is anybody looking at that? Because I'm just wondering if there's a plan, maybe replace that money or figure out a different way to send it.
They did look at it this last session, and I think recapture payments for many of those districts decreased, but I don't know that it was meaningful for those particular communities or what they necessarily wanted to see. I have in the last week seen a couple of school boards who have voted not to send their recapture payments in. One down in the Houston area, and I think one up in the DFW area recently.
Keller and Spring Branch.
Okay, well, you all know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm not going to stand up here and advocate for that as a method of protesting the system in general. I'm just telling you I'm aware that it's happening, and I don't know what the fallout from that is going to be. Honestly, I don't think it'll be good, but I don't know to what end. I've just seen the headlines on it. Yes, ma'am.
What is the possibility of having a full-time Texas legislation?
Well, I get asked that sometimes, and I'll tell you, I don't think that would be a good idea. I think a part-time citizen legislature is definitely in the best interest of Texas. I don't want to see us become like Washington, D.C., where we have full-time. $600 a month, there's a big incentive for me to get out and work in my community and feed my family in a different regard. I'll also tell you, in 140 days, we had 8,000 ideas filed as bills for Texas. If we were down there year-round, have mercy. It is hard enough to hold the line against bad ideas, irrespective of party. I have dear Republican colleagues that I think they have terrible ideas too. They might, love, they said something about me, whatever. But a lot of people show up and think that they justify their existence there by filing more bills, more laws, passing more things into action. And I think that there's a significant risk, and I think we were set up as a part-time citizen legislature for a reason. An example, just one example. 2 summers ago, you might have seen on the news where we were in extended special sessions because our Democrat counterparts really hated our election bill and they fled the state for a while. So they came back, and it was fall. We'd all, at this point, been down there way too long as it was. We're all sick and tired of each other. And one of those fellas filed an amendment to the bill about UIL sports, where boys participate with boys, girls with girls. He filed an amendment to that to say, okay, fine, but any school district that does that has to give a trophy to a kid who doesn't get to participate in the sport they want to participate in. And I read that and I blinked. I was like, no, wait, no, read it again. Took a picture of it to save it for posterity because he was wanting to give non-participation trophies now. You don't want us down there. year-round. I don't wanna be down there year-round. I don't. It's nothing like getting done with the work down there and leaving Austin and coming back to Texas. So, I thank you. Any other questions, I'd be happy to stick around. I am running to serve you again. I would be honored to have your vote next March, to get to continue working for you. I think our Texas is worth it. I think that the fight is worth having, and I ask for the privilege of doing that again. Thank y'all so much. God bless you.